Of course, I remember the first time I cracked the mic, and I remember how I felt. I remember how excited I was. It was Saturday, February 11th, 1967, at WYNZ in Ypsilanti, Michigan. 1520 on your dial. It was at 17 North Huron Street in Ypsilanti, upstairs. And I sat down behind that control room, and I turned on the microphone, and I spoke live on the radio for the very first time. It was a feeling I had never, ever had before, and a feeling that I had hoped would never end. I had experience speaking into microphones at school. You know, sometimes I was the announcer for school assemblies or the narrator for a concert, and occasionally I was allowed to make announcements over the school PA system. But to go on the air where people would actually pick up what I was saying on their radios in their cars or on their transistor radios or on the portable radio on top of the refrigerator was so exciting that after all these years, I still don't have the words to adequately explain it. But I can tell you this. It's now 2025, and it was just as exciting this morning to turn the microphone on. What's been the highest point in my radio career? Well, there have been many. I think that being able to provide a service to people is probably the most gratifying part of my radio career. I mean, it's had a lot of, high points and meeting lots of celebrities and doing lots of special shows and stuff like that. But when I think back and try to, create like my own mental highlight reel, I go back to, for instance, December 24th, 1969. I was 17 years old. I was working at night on WOIA in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which was a rock station. And it was Christmas Eve, and I got a phone call from a guy at a place called Ann Arbor Network. Now, Ann Arbor Network was an organization that provided food and temporary lodging for kids who were in trouble, kids who ran away from home or kids who were, for one reason or another, homeless. And they asked me if I could go on the air and ask our listeners to contribute food to them on Christmas Eve because they didn't really have enough to feed all of the people that they had to feed that night. So I made an announcement, one announcement, maybe 30 seconds long. I mean, explaining this to you took longer than the announcement on the air. And I got a telephone call from a guy who owned a drive-in restaurant on Washtenaw Avenue in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The restaurant was called Mr. S. And he asked me, how many dinners do they need? So I called them back up, and they said they needed about 100. So I called the guy at Mr. S restaurant, and I said, well, they need about 100. And he said, okay, I'll keep my staff on for maybe another hour or so, and we'll cook up 100 chicken dinners, and we'll get them right over. He said, there's only one thing I ask of you. And I said to him, what's that? He said, don't tell anybody we're doing this. This is not for publicity. I want complete anonymity. I just think it's the right thing to do. And that was the power of radio. Just to be able to make a simple announcement and help to enrich the lives of some people who were going through unfortunate circumstances in their life on Christmas Eve created a memory that has never gone away. That is too difficult because when you've had on your show John Lennon and Paul McCartney and Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and Elton John and Billy Joel and Stevie Wonder. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. Each one is memorable in its own unique and distinct way. So you can't even really compare them to one another. A conversation with Elton John, standing next to Elton John's piano while he's playing it, has its own special place in the radio memory bank. But then again, standing on stage next to Paul McCartney, sharing one microphone, standing to his left, and forgetting what it was that I was even saying because I looked at the side of his face and I said, oh my God, this is exactly what George Harrison saw when they were on stage and they would put their heads together to use one microphone during the height of Beatlemania. So, too many awesome memories. Each one has its own special place, you know, on the mountaintop. My favorite listener interactions probably took place during the 6 years that I hosted the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital radiothons for the New York metropolitan area, because we needed lots and lots of volunteers to be able to pull those radiothons off. They were broadcast live on the air, and we did them from the Woodbridge Center Mall in Woodbridge, New Jersey. But it was 24 hours a day for 3 days, and so we needed hundreds of listeners to volunteer because we didn't have enough staff to be with us all through the day and night to help us put on the show and raise money for St. Jude's. And during all 6 of those years, largely through the assistance of those people who listened on the radio every day, we raised over $1 million each time. My toughest on-air moment was on my birthday, December 9th, 1980, because the night before John Lennon was assassinated. And so I heard about that. I had just gone to bed, and I heard the news bulletin, and so I didn't go to sleep that night, December 8th. I just put my clothes back on and went to the radio station, and all of the employees of the radio station, they were all coming in, and we were putting together special programming, and some people were going over to the Dakota, and we were trying to contact friends of John's, people who knew John Lennon, to come on the air and talk about his life and his legacy. And it was a bonding experience with the audience, especially those of us who grew up with the Beatles, because it was kind of a permanent break with our youth, you know, from the Beatle era to the post Beatle era, and it was an incredibly sad and difficult moment, but through the radio, people bonded together as a community. A couple of days later, thousands and thousands and thousands of people gathered in Central Park, and many of the radio stations in New York, all the rock stations, but some that weren't rock stations, signed off for 10 minutes of silence when the John Lennon memorial took place in the park. But that was tough. But without the sense of community that was made possible by the radio, people would have, had to mourn alone. Instead, we had an opportunity to all mourn together. I've had on-air oops moments. I think everybody has. I've been, sometimes I've said the name of the wrong station because I've worked at more than one. And sometimes, especially after starting a new job, muscle memory takes over when your mouth moves and you end up referring to a station that you don't work at anymore. I mean, I've made mistakes like that. But I think probably there were two things. I fell asleep on the air when I was 18 at WORJ in Orlando on a Saturday morning. I just put my head down for a second. I lifted my head back up, and 33 minutes had gone by. And Lonely Days by the Bee Gees was the song I had been playing, and all I heard on the speakers were because that's the noise that it made at the end of the record. And I looked down, and all the phones were lit up, and it was a pretty embarrassing moment for me. I got fired. And then I once read a commercial on the air without pre-reading it at all, and the copywriter threw in a joke line, figuring that, people would look at it on the paper, laugh, but never say it on the air. But, I was still quite young, and it was a commercial for a store called The Bra Shop. And I was just happily reading the commercial for the bra shop, including the last line, which was, "For the tit-fit that just won't quit, visit the bra shop." None of my bosses heard it. Thank goodness. I probably wouldn't be here today talking with you had they. Is there any interview I would love to redo? Um, I'd like to redo a lot of them, but not because I thought later that maybe I should have done this or maybe I should have done that. I would like to redo them just because they were all so enjoyable. I really like having guests on the show because, you see, when the guests are here, the guest is the star. That's my philosophy on my show. The guest is the star. We put the spotlight on the guest. I'm the facilitator. I help the star to convey what it is that they wish to get across to my audience. So although in a technical sense I may be leading the interview, I spend a lot of time listening to what they're saying. So then I follow up in a manner that takes them where I perceive they want to go. And so in a sense, they're leading the interview, not me. So redoing, I like having the same guests on more than once, but not necessarily redoing a specific interview. What's a challenge that radio people don't always see? I've been thinking about that one because I don't really understand the premise of the question. We see and experience the same problems everybody else does, regardless of what it was that they do for a living. Those things that are unique to us, like trying to be funny or entertaining or informative at 5 o'clock in the morning, are things that we just, get used to eventually over time, I suppose. The getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's that. But I don't find, other than each job that anyone has its own unique challenges. I think that's something that we all have in common, but the challenges that are unique to each job are things that, each individual gets used to, hopefully, masters over time. A tradition or a segment that I love doing? Well, I love having the rooster crow at 6 o'clock in the morning. On my show, every morning at 6, the rooster crows. And it's the same rooster that's been crowing here in New York City at 6 a.m. since the early 1980s. I've taken that rooster with me to every subsequent radio station. And the reason for the rooster is because I've done my shows from beautiful studios like this in Midtown Manhattan, looking out the window at gigantic skyscrapers and looking down to the street and seeing the sidewalks filled with people. But radio covers a lot of ground. And even in the pre-app days, now on the free iHeartRadio app, you can pick us up pretty much everywhere. But, it used to be from the transmitter tower to your radio. That was the only way to get the signal. And it hadn't occurred to me, as a person who lives in Manhattan and works in Manhattan, that farmers get up in the morning and listen to my show. But they do. New Jersey, for instance, is a huge agricultural state. And I got a call one morning from a person who was up early listening to the radio and, was making a request. And I said, well, where are you? And he said, well, I'm at work. And I said, where do you work? And he said, Valley Tone Farm. And it turned out that there were farmers who got up before the sun that listened to the show. So I decided I'd have the rooster crow in their honor every morning at 6. Also love strange news because it's true, the strange news is real. We don't make it up. I used to have a segment where we'd make up strange news stories, but we labeled it News Stories Shelley Sunstein Never Told You because we made them up. So people knew that it was fiction. But strange news is all based on reality. And people seem to get a kick out of that. And people sometimes, years later, will, refer to one of those stories. I I had a conversation in the 1970s here in New York City on the radio. Every few years, somebody walks up to me because I guess I asked a question on the air. Every few years, to this day, somebody will walk up to me and say, Jim, did you ever find out what nuns wear to the beach? I guess I asked that question once in the 1970s, but no, I still don't have an answer. If I could relive one radio moment, what would it be? Well, there are a few radio moments that I've had that I do relive annually, year after year after year. There are multiple listeners whose births I've announced on the air on the day of their birth, and every birthday since. And some of those people are, you know, in their 40s now, and I've announced their birthday on the air every single year. I know a couple of them have all of those announcements. They recorded them and are all collected. And I mean, it's just an awesome thing. And if it there's a family on Long Island where that's true. Oh, Alan and Dolores Salazzo of New Jersey. Their first date was at one of my personal appearances. And I just announced their daughter's 30th birthday just a couple of weeks ago. So moments like that, I do get to relive. And it makes me feel good every time I have that experience. I hope it makes them feel good too. The radio tradition that I hope never goes away is keeping the audience first in your mind. Always sitting down behind the microphone, prepared to do the best that you can to create an atmosphere in other people's lives that provides some positivity, some joy, maybe a little happiness. That may sound kind of pretentious, but it's not meant that way. Because a lot of people use radio not just for entertainment or for information, not just to find out whether Macy's is having a sale today, even though that's very important. You know, commercials convey information and that information is useful to people. But many people use the radio for companionship. I know I did when I was a kid. I know I still do now when I turn on the radio and, hear that voice coming through the speakers in the dark of night. I have so many good memories listening to the radio, hearing people do that in a way that really benefited me. And I think that the tradition that we have of being a friend to our audience is really, really important. I'm not to just be a big, company booster. I want to be a big radio booster, which includes all of our competitors, no matter who owns them, no matter who operates them. My direct competitor, just like me, we can both be your friend. Spotify can't be your friend. Pandora can't be your friend. Algorithms are not, your friend. They have their place in the world, but they can't be your friend. I can be your friend. It's one of the greatest things about radio. Radio in 2025, like all media, faces a lot of challenges because of technological change and economic pressures. But radio has faced challenges many times in the past. I remember when I was a little kid, there were a lot of people saying, oh, nobody listens to the radio anymore because, there was radio with pictures, there was television. And it was, radio. Who listens to radio? And I remember that there was an advertising campaign in the early 1960s. So I would have been, 9, 10 years old. And this ad campaign had real famous singers, like Ella Fitzgerald or somebody like that, big name singers. I'm not sure that was her, but big name singers. And they had a special song about radio, and it was called Who Listens to Radio? Now, the population of the United States at that time was about 145, 150 million people. And the song went, the lyrics were at the end of the phrase, who listens to radio? Just 135 million people. That's all. And that was at a time when radio was facing a real strong challenge because of technological change. Well, here we are again, and we face challenges because of technological change. What do? We find ways to put our programming on more and more platforms that more and more people have access to, so they can take what they like best about radio with them anywhere they go, no matter what kind of equipment they use. So that's one of the big challenges today. Another challenge that we have today is just trying to convey to the listening public and to the advertising community the relevancy of radio. We've had an easier time convincing the audience because 92% of the population of the United States listens to radio. It's like that old jingle I was telling you about a while back in the early 1960s. That we know is fact, and we know that people like the radio because they listen to it. But the media landscape can sometimes get so confusing and so overwhelming that our friends in the advertising industry sometimes lose focus when it comes to radio, and we have to find a way to keep our message alive right there in front of them all of the time. Being a part of the iHeartRadio family, what's my favorite thing? That's the question. Well, that's an easy answer. I get an opportunity to come to work every morning and see all of my colleagues whose company I enjoy so much. People ask me sometimes, oh, you get up so early, you go to work so early, what is that like? Well, I get here to work, and I've got Elvis Duran and his whole crew down the hall at Z100. I've got Cubby and Christine right next door, two of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet in your life. And the WKTU studios are right down the hall over there, and we've got WOR over that way, and Power 105.1. I can't tell you how much fun it has been for me to watch young Charlemagne turn into such a big star while remaining such a real nice, unassuming, friendly guy. We spend a lot of time together here. We have a lot in common with one another because we get up in the middle of the night and come and do radio shows. We help each other out. The environment is really good. It's creative. It's stimulating. And don't tell the bosses, but I'd do it if they didn't pay me.